Testing, testing. All right.
Is it Joe?
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started since we're at 11 now. Just want to thank everybody for coming this morning. We'll go ahead and keep going here. So this is a topic I've been working on for about 15 months now, so I feel like I know a lot about it, but we'll see how that goes in the talk here. So it's going to focus on the actual testing methodology, not necessarily which vendor we selected or which vendors we tested or anything like that. But it is important to note that some of it you're going to want to tailor it specifically to your environment if you do take some of this content and want to use it yourself. So who I am, my name is Dan Beavin. I'm a senior security researcher at Indiana University Health here in Indianapolis. I went too far, didn't I? I've been doing about 7 years of security work in various different companies, and about 15 years of IT experience total. A little bit about me, kind of personal notes. I like to play board games, spend time outside, and spend time with my wife, who I made come here today. So this is our first security conference, so she's the one that sticks out like a sore thumb, probably. And apparently I also recently learned that I'm accident prone. And there's some people I work with here that don't know this story yet, but I was on a conference call a few weeks ago, and I accidentally smacked the cactus on my desk, and it was stuck in my hand, and I flung it to get out of my hand, and it flung and went into my foot. So I have a lot of accidental stories like this that have just come up over the years, so I'll probably pepper some of those through as we go. And then also this is our cat. She likes to sit there and work with me every day. That top monitor always has baseball games on or bird videos, because that's what she likes to do during the day. So we'll get into the actual, nitty-gritty of the talk now. These are some of the common issues that I've seen in a lot of people's testing methodologies and some of the testing methodologies of companies that I've worked for in the past. One of the big things I always see the most common is people just becoming friends with specific vendors of certain companies, whether that be specific to endpoint products or to security products or IT products in general. Which there's nothing wrong with doing that. You just got to remember that at the end of the day, they are there to provide you a good or a service, and they're always going to be looking out for the best interest of their company, just like you're always looking out for the best interest of your company. You don't want to fall for the buzzword bingo, which everybody has seen the IT buzzword bingo sheets, and we almost all pull them out during those, demo sales conference calls. So don't let a bunch of fancy buzzwords kind of cloud your opinion of a product or a vendor. Another big one is buying customer service that doesn't stick around. And what I mean by that is you want to find other customers that utilize the product that you are testing. And you want to get opinions from them about how was the customer service during your testing, how was it, year one, and years after that. When you put in a ticket, how quick are they to respond to it? Is the answer always upgrade, or we'll just turn that feature off? Or do they actually work with you and try to improve the product overall, not just for you, but for all customers? Another one that people may have their own, opinions on it is kind of be wary of an account rep changing multiple times during your testing period. You may only be testing for 3 months, but if you have 3 different account reps over that 3-month period, that might seem a little suspicious and give you a little bit of uncertainty in the company. If they're constantly having turnover like that, are you always going to have that good point of contact that you can go to, that you're familiar with and you've worked with? Don't let the vendor buy your business. We've all seen it before where they promise execs or take you out to nice steak dinners or whatnot to try to sway your decision. Try to make sure that you are making a decision based on the technical aspects of the product and the customer service that it provides. Another thing that a lot of people will do is just rely solely on independent third-party testing. Now, that's not to say that a lot of those third-party testing are not good, but they're not your environment. Your environment is always going to be different than what a third-party vendor tested. They're not going to have your application stack. They're not going to have your users. So it's important to not just rely on those specifically. Now, MITRE does have a really good page that they put out where they've tested several EPP products, which is nice to be able to go there. And it's almost information overload at first. And then Gartner is always one that a lot of your executives and higher level people in the company are going to care about and be interested in seeing. And then from the title of the whole slide, don't drink the Kool-Aid, which essentially means don't just listen to that sales pitch and think this is the greatest product ever, we're going to buy it today. Make sure you actually do a solid testing methodology for your organization so you're providing good insight to them. So it's kind of a 2-phased approach is how I do this. First phase is the technical testing process. And what I'm going to do here is just kind of go through how the environment's set up, the malware samples that I used, some of the APT style simulation attack tools that I used, and kind of how I got roped into doing this was everyone at work knows I like to break things. So they gave me the opportunity to break 11 different products from 11 different vendors to see which ones would work in our environment. So a little bit about the test environment. I try to make it as standardized as possible. The initial test wasn't necessarily to be similar to our application stack, but more similar to our operating system stack. So what I did was we took a Windows 7 image and a Windows 10 image, which I got from the MSD Insight from Microsoft. You can go to that URL and pretty much just get a 90-day licensed copy of Windows that you can use for testing. So you don't necessarily need to have Microsoft licensing to do this. If you want to do it yourself, kind of outside of a company, you don't have to rely on, KMS keys or anything like that. And then each one of those VMs, I installed the Flare VM toolkit on, and that was kind of important if you want to verify that some of the attacks or exploits worked properly. If you have that toolkit already on there, it just made it a little easier than having to ones and twos grab tools here and there. So when I did this, it was May of 2018, and I started then, and I tested all the way until about August or September. But what I did was I made sure I kept that same Windows patching from May 2018 the whole time, because a Windows patch could have come out that could have affected either in a good way or adversely the functionality of a tool. So the best way to kind of keep that standardized all the way through was to use the same OS update set, the same base image, and all that. So what I did was I just utilized VMware Fusion and did a snapshot of each VM after the initial setup was done, and then after I installed each vendor's product. So once I would install, vendor A's product, I would do another snapshot, and that's what I would revert back to every time before I conducted a new test or a new sample. That way you don't get any contamination from any of the prior ones. And then also, Windows 7 and Windows 10 was our like big desktop OS structure. If you have another large OS base, you want to make sure you do that. If it's Mac, Linux, you definitely want to make sure you test those too, which you will have to do slightly different because a lot of that Windows malware is not going to be the same for a Mac or a Linux. So how I got some of the virus sample and malware samples and kind of what they were. So I have standard malware, which I don't know how everyone defines standard malware, maybe a little different. But to me, what that was just basic Trojans, default scripts, default attacks from tools like Cobalt Strike or Empire. So these are just the ones you could stand the environment up, generate the default script, no obfuscation, nothing special, and just throw it at it and see what the results of that were. I wrote a couple sample custom malware samples there, and I've had several people that keep trying to get them from me, and so far no one has achieved that. So what kind of purpose of that was to try to prevent static analysis. So a lot of these tools are looking at hashes that have been seen before, IOCs that have been seen before. If you're using something custom or something that hasn't been out in the wild before, the tool's not going to be able just to look at a hash or an IOC to be able to block it. Botnet, crypto miner, ransomware, these are all things that we're always concerned about, so obviously those are things you want to test as well. And this avoid the malware dump, a lot of testing methodology I've seen have used this, where they'll take 1,000 samples or a couple hundred samples and throw them on a machine and just let them all execute. Well, that sounds great, right? But then when you go into your console to see what alerts were, some of those samples may trigger 4, 5, 6 alerts. Well, if you don't know which ones are going to trigger which alerts and you don't know what they're actually going to do, you may say, I tested 1,000 samples and there were 999 alerts. That means it caught 999 of my 1,000 samples. That may not be entirely accurate. And it would be very, very difficult to try to test and lay out which ones were caught, which ones weren't. However, there is kind of a caveat to that it is a good way to test if you can overwhelm a sensor. Because I did have some sensors that I was able to drop hundreds of malware samples on there and execute them all at once, and the sensor just overwhelmed, and then I was able to do other attacks because of that, because it was so busy processing the initial load. And then just make sure you obtain these from legitimate and trusted sources. The ones that I obtained all my samples from were VirusTotal and VirusShare.com. VirusShare is actually really nice if you I don't have any affiliation with them, but they're a really nice one. You pretty much just can reach out to them, tell them that you're a security researcher, security engineer, whatnot, or you're wanting to do some testing of endpoint products, and you can get access to their website to get copies of samples. So outside of just these samples, I use the tool from Nextron Systems, which is for free on GitHub, and it's called the APT Simulator. So it does a lot of different functionality. This was just some of them. It's about 4 or 5 times the number of things that I have on this screen, but it would have just been impossible to list all that on the screen. But what this was used for was this was a way to be able to have, again, a standardized method to attack with. I downloaded it from GitHub and used the exact same set from every single test with every single vendor. So that way there was no new functionality or new features put into it. And it was an easy way to replicate the same attack structure over and over and over. And what I did was I broke it up into like 6 sections, because the tool itself has 8 different options when you run it, or you can just run everything based on how you'd want to do. But if you're not an offensive security-minded person, like I spend primarily all my time in offensive security research, if you're more of a blue team person, how you conduct attacks may not be the thing you do on a day-to-day basis. So having a tool like this is really beneficial, because you can get the results without having to have all that knowledge yourself. So as I said, I broke it up into 6. So this was like the APT simulation 6 that I broke it up into. And this is going to look just like a bunch of random samples and numbers and not make any sense. I'm going to try to explain it well here. So what I did was worked with the group and found out which types of attacks and which types of Trojans, malware, issues that we would see most common, and got samples of all those. So I did 6 Trojan, 6 virus. Viruses were more like worm style attacks. Botnet, crypto, ransomware was all under the botnet. The custom was its own. And then the APT simulator. Now you'll see percentages And this is going to be different for every single organization. The percentage was kind of our weight of how important we felt that if it caught, it was. So on a scale of 0 to 100%, when you would go through and complete a vendor, add up all those, and that was kind of the weighted average score for the tool. Everywhere is going to have a different way to do that. You don't necessarily want to go how many samples did it catch versus how many it didn't, because obviously, a command and control is probably more important than a virus that's just going to, make your computer run slow, right? Like you don't want to weight those the same way. But then also we did just on number of detections too, because somebody always is going to ask, well, I see 4 red boxes and the rest of them are green, so that means it missed 4. And they're not gonna understand that weightedness, and you don't necessarily want to always have to go into the nitty-gritty details of it. But the reason I kind of did the chart was more for the higher level people in your organization. Those are the ones that are going to want to see like a nice chart that's laid out very simple that they can look at in one page and go, bam, this is the results of the testing. They don't necessarily care about the 90-page document that I wrote on how I conducted it, because every one of these vendors had about a 90-page document, and my CISO probably was bored out of his mind reading every one of those documents. But that's more for the executives in your organization. So, reporting. You're doing all this testing. If you don't report your results or find a way to put that in a format that you can give to others to digest, what were you really doing? You was a waste of time if you aren't finding a way to actually put this into words. So the report should include a result of all of your testing. Should include features and benefits of each one of the tools. You want to make sure you look at what your current application, EPP stack is. And you want to have comparables of this is what our current one does, this is what this vendor would provide to us, or what we would lose switching to this one. Because there is always that chance that switching to another one, you may lose a piece of functionality. If you didn't use that functionality before, probably not that big of a deal. But if you were using a critical piece of functionality in this new vendor, even though it has great detection rates, you don't have that piece anymore. You're leaving a gap that was filled once before. As with everything else I've done, you want to make sure that you keep it very standardized, uniform, the same structure all the way through. And make sure you know who the audience is for your report. Like I said, these are generally more technical. I actually outline how I conducted the test, what commands exactly were ran to simulate the attacks. Executives aren't going to want to read that. They're going to want the initial chart. I show this is the stuff for the people on your team, your blue team members, your offensive security members. They're going to want to read and understand what was caught. The red team's definitely going to want to read it, so then they know how they would be able to get around your solution that you pick. Screenshots were really important to add in there. It seems a very trivial thing to include in there, but whenever someone's reviewing that and they want to see what is an end user going to see when something gets triggered. Are they going to get a big flash and alert on the screen? Are they going to get nothing? Is the tool just not going to load? These are all things that are kind of important to make sure that those are screenshot. And then also the administrative console. You want to be able to look at what a security agent is going to see. Are they going to be able to go in that console and see what actually happened? Are they just seeing that there was an alert? Is there going to be telemetry data from start to finish of where that what the attack structure was? So that's important to include in there. And I said before, make sure you do testing with your current platform, not just include the features and benefits, but put your current platform through those same steps that you're putting all these new vendors through also. Because it might surprise you how well or how poorly your current platform performs. And you need to have that baseline metric to work off of. If your baseline is this, and your new vendors are much higher or much lower, you need to have that baseline to be able to go in and say, I need funding for X, Y, Z. So before you move into the second phase of the process, you've tested, I think there's 21 EPP products technically like on the market at the time that I did this. You obviously have to have some way to narrow that down, because you don't want to do the whole second phase of the test, which could be up to 90 days per product on 21 different products. It's all of a sudden you're taking years to select an endpoint product. That's not ideal. So what we did was we took all the data, sat down and weeded out the obvious no solutions. There's going to be some products that are obviously ones you're just not going to want to do. They're either not going to meet criteria you already have, they're going to be worse than the solution you already have deployed. So once you take that data, get it weeded down to your 5 or 6 kind of ones that you want to go with, and present that to your broader team. Bring in everyone that's in security, everyone that's going to be in your desktop group, the help desk group. Even your server admins are going to be interested in this because endpoint products on their servers can adversely affect performance. And the last thing you want to do is have something that runs great on workstations and runs like trash on a server and kills application usage, because then they won't install it and you'll have this constant blind spot in your organization. So as before, you prepare a list of features, benefits. You're essentially taking those giant reports and consolidating it down into one PowerPoint presentation. And you want to kind of break it down per vendor, what was good, what was bad, the actual testing results, and take all those charts that you generated in your prior reports that I showed and use those to outline a lot of that presentation with. So what we did was we had a 2-hour meeting. I think it was originally going to be 45 minutes, and it just kept going and going because there were so many questions about it. And that was just the top 5 solutions. So we tested 11, broke it down to 5. And then from that, we got down to the top 3. And we decided to do all 3 tests at the same time, like the 3 phase 2 parts, all at the same time. If you have a big enough team, go for it. If you're doing it in a small team, don't recommend doing that. So phase 2 is basically the pilot test. This is when you're going to install it on production systems in your environment with your application stack and really see what's detected, what's not detected, and have it actually put through the paces in your environment. Not just looking for what is it going to catch, but more so what things are going to get triggered as false alerts. Are you going to have performance issues in certain areas? In certain types of environments, like where I work at, IU Health, healthcare, we have a lot of medical devices, and you can't treat those the same way as you treat a regular workstation. Some of them won't even let you install anything other than, your normal, like, legacy style AV vendors. They just won't support it. So understanding that when you do your pilot testing is very important. And as I said before, this is going to be the longest portion of your testing. So the methodology here was, let's deploy it to a small subset of machines in the organization first. So what we did was we grabbed 4 or 5 machines from as many areas as we could cover and as many disciplines as we could cover. And we deployed that out in just a detection only. So it's running alongside the current installed protection platform. So that way you don't have any gaps in actual prevention. You don't necessarily want to remove everything and rely on the default built-in Windows Defender if you're running Microsoft with no centralized management to it to be your only way to block anything. So once you do that, the point of that phase is to build and tune the policies in the platform. Find those false positives, find the things that are causing performance issues, and work with the different vendors to correct those either through whitelisting, through issues, maybe it could be with their sensor or their agent. Sometimes you'll come back with a load of data for them and they'll be able to actually improve their sensor and their product themselves and roll it out to more of their customers. So it's actually a win-win for both people in that aspect. And once you feel like you've got a good, solid policy built out, you have good metrics in place, you can start moving some of these to prevention or protection mode. But still continue expanding out further and further. You don't want to limit yourself to 50, 60 machines. I think as we were doing it, we had it deployed out to a couple of solutions, deployed out to about 3,500 instances per solution. So about 7,000 endpoints had 2 different solutions on them at one point. So we had a really good subset of machines to test with. So if you're going to put the product through its paces, you got to do the offensive side of things, and everyone appreciates this meme. This is when it maybe gets a little bit more funny. Some of the dryness gets out of it. But during the pilot phase, you're going to want to test all aspects of it. You're going to want to put it through a pen test. So you want to make sure if you have an internal red team that conducts pen testing, make sure some of these endpoints that have the different solutions are in your target. are part of your scope. You want to go at them the same way you would any other machine in your organization. That way, you can try to see what's actually caught, what techniques you were able to use in prior pen tests that were successful, see if they are still successful now. If they're not successful, try to find ways around them. It's not necessarily a way to look at was I able to get around the solution, but more so what was the solution able to see. If you deploy something and you've now got EDR style like data or threat hunting style data, you can go in there and see where the attack started, where it went, and how it got there. That's much more important than just did it stop it or did it not. And then important thing with that is make sure you work with the defensive or blue team or your operations team to see how they would react to that data. They're probably going to see a lot of data that they haven't seen before now, especially if you're switching platforms, the way the data is presented, what data is actually caught. The policies may not be as fine-tuned as what you currently have deployed, so some things may sneak through cracks that weren't there in your other solution. So being able to work with them, understand what they're looking for, what's important to them, is a critical part of it too. So that leads into the blue team aspect of it. Probably not how your blue team looks, but so during the testing, they actually probably have the most difficult job during this testing. You would think deploying it out to a bunch of endpoints is going to be a difficult job, but the blue team has the hardest job because they have to go through and look at all of these alerts and figure out which ones are false positives and which ones are true alerts. And you would like to think that you know everything in your environment and every application that's deployed and exactly how it works, and nobody does. Like, especially if you have a large environment where you've got tens of thousands of endpoints, there's going to be random applications and random scripts, and somebody downloaded this off SourceForge and they're using it to, do X, Y, and Z with. This tool may start catching some of that. So being able to figure out what's actually a false positive, what is actual alert, is really difficult. And it sounds super easy, but if you're deploying it to 7,000 workstations and now you're starting to process that data, that's a lot of data to process for what on most places is just a couple people. So you need to make sure they're aware of the amount of work they're going to have to, that there is about to come to them. But there's a lot of stuff that's going to creep up, like I said. You're going to find PowerShell scripts that are running that your, end user compute team or your desktop team is pushing out to deploy software that looks extremely malicious. If you work in a healthcare or manufacturing environment, you deal with a lot of like antiquated devices or antiquated software. A lot of that does some malicious looking activity. We had a lot of issues with stuff that looked like process injection because it essentially was doing process injection, which you don't ideally want in a piece of software, but you can't go back to a healthcare vendor and say, hey, you need to make this change for us, even though it's going to cost you $20 million to make this change. You got to be able to whitelist it and move on from that at the time. But also through this, you want to conduct normal incident response type activities. You don't necessarily want to tell the blue team that, hey, we're getting ready to pen test these machines. Maybe the manager of the blue team should know, so that way it doesn't go up the chain real fast that we're getting attacked. But you want to see how they handle incidents, how they handle the data that's coming in there. If you have a SIM, push the log data to your SIM so you can process it with all the other data in your environment and see how it's going to fit in. If you're using a third-party SOC or you have a SOC internally, make sure that data gets to them as well. Another important part is just the actual daily use functionality of it. You need to determine what functionality is important to your organization. A lot of these tools have a whole bunch of functionality. How much of it is important to you? How much of it's not important to you? What are you going to use every day? Is EDR important? Is threat hunting important? Vulnerability management? GIFs is on there because I have a funny story. I actually worked for a company that selected their messaging platform because it supported GIFs natively in it. That was the only reason they selected it. And they regretted that decision shortly afterwards. On-premise or cloud-based, also very important. Some, types of organizations can't have that data going out to the cloud. So does the vendor offer both on-prem or cloud-based? Is it important to you if it's on-prem or cloud-based? If it's on-prem, do you want to deal with the management of the servers and manage all the data that's on them? Something that's big in our environment was do the installs require reboots? You know, this seems like a very trivial thing. Like, I push this out. Is it going to cause a reboot? The other aspect of it is when I uninstall what's currently on there, is it going to cause a reboot? So am I going to uninstall something, reboot, push something out, reboot? Like, how is that going to affect an end user? Most of them are okay with the reboot that they have to get once a month for their Windows updates. Some are probably not even okay with that one. But you don't want to have that one plus 2 others, and then there's no telling what the desktop team has been pushing out. So all of a sudden people are getting 7, 8, 9 reboots a month. You got to start taking some of that into consideration and try to work with teams that are already deploying other tools or solutions or updates to try to align that reboot cycle if it's needed. And then medical devices, PLC devices, they just can't be rebooted at any time. You can't reboot a machine that's running an MRI in the middle of the day because someone could be having an MRI done in the middle of the day. You can't just do that to them. And then you want to look at the overall ease of using the tool. There's going to be people that spend all day long, every day inside of this tool. Is it horrible to look at? Does it have a dark mode? Because that's everybody's thing right now. Is it easy to navigate around within the tool? Is it easy to find data? Can you easily search for something and get the results you're looking for? Or do you need to have a master's degree in SQL or something to, I don't even know if that's a real thing, probably somewhere. But you don't want to have to know a crazy amount of knowledge about how to search and query within the tool. You want it to be very intuitive and easy to use. Features. This is the part that I probably lost the most people when I started talking about the different products, because the features are just so different from tool to tool. I said before, installation of it is pretty important. Is it easy to just push it out from the console? Can you use an external tool like SCCM or something else that's in your environment? Does it work in VDI? So for us, VDI was very important. It's not just does it install on VDI, but how does it perform in VDI? If you put it on your VDI gold image, is it killing your performance or is it improving your performance? It can go both ways, or it can make no difference at all. I've seen environments where it made really no difference, but without knowing what features and functionality was turned off or on, that can make a big difference on performance. And then actual uninstallation of it. Is it easy to do it from the console? Is it something that has to be a command line driven directly on the machine? Those are both important. Can you do it through your normal tools? The actual updating of it, how often are the agents updated? When do you lose compatibility between platforms? So if you update it, the cloud console or your server, how many versions back of the agent is still supported? A lot of legacy AV, you're going to get stuck where when you update the server, you got to update all of your endpoints at the same time, otherwise you can lose functionality. But then also, will it cover all of those old assets you have hiding in closets? Because we all have that XP machine stuck in a network closet somewhere that's running something that we want to know if is it going to work with that as well. As before, does it integrate with your third-party tools and services, SIEM, SOC? Does it need to have Windows Defender disabled? Does Windows Defender recognize it as a security product and automatically disable itself? Or do you need to use like a GPO to push out to disable that? Remote access and quarantine was something I hadn't really seen in a lot of I hadn't seen in a lot of endpoint protection products, so I haven't worked with a lot of them before. But that was a functionality that actually we thought was pretty important, because if you don't have a way to isolate that host quickly without sending someone to it to go touch that device, that's a very good benefit. I can go in the console, click a button, and all of a sudden it's isolated to only be able to communicate with that cloud platform or whatever IP addresses you may have internally whitelisted to allow it to get to. But from that kind of rolls into, you don't want to give that access to everybody. So having role-based access control for the console is important too. Then you can give people like server and infrastructure teams, help desk support teams, access into the console where they can see some of the data but not necessarily manipulate it or manipulate information that's on the machines. Management of them, is it easy to group them into separate groups for policy updating? When you whitelist stuff, is it done globally? Can you do it at the policy level? Can you assign alerts to specific individuals? You may have someone that's kind of your Mac person that's a little bit more skilled in that than a Windows OS. So you may want to assign alerts to specific people. Is that important? What data is recorded, and then how long is the data actually recorded for? Some environments you can keep that data for 30 days, some you can keep it for 7, some you don't get to keep it after the machine's rebooted. In non-persistent VDI, you may lose that data as soon as the machine's rebooted. And then how easy it is to search and find what you're looking for. You want to make sure that those searching functionality and capabilities are there as well, because if the data's in the tool but you can't find it, what good is it to you? Testing each environment. I've said VDI several times, obviously, because that was a big one for us. You want to test VDI, desktops, workstations, servers. If you have PLCs or medical devices based on your environment, you need to make sure you thoroughly test those as well. If you get odd results, you need to make sure you kind of verify those. And where we really saw odd results is in VDI. Some products would boot 50 seconds faster than another one set up with similar functionality, similar tooling. So if you see 2 VDI images that are identical with just 2 different products and they're booting 50-second different time, that's a noticeable difference for an end user, and they're going to complain about it. So I kind of touch on one of those topics further, and that's VDI. And items to consider in that is, performance, and not necessarily how long it took to boot, but how was performance afterwards. Was, if you're doing a back office functionality where you're generating 150 PDFs, is it going to scan every one of those PDFs that you're creating and look for malicious content? If it does, it's probably going to slow down that process. Is there a way to control it to where it's not necessarily going to look at that process, but still look at other PDFs that get dropped onto the system? How quickly are you able to get to different tools, different functionality? You still need to put it through the same paces just like you would any other environment, but you are going to notice drastic performance differences in VDI versus standard like desktops, workstations. Initial login time is always going to be important for people. When they click that power button in the morning, do they have time to go get a cup of coffee and then go chat with everyone for their system boots, or do they hit it and by the time they sit down and get ready to work, it's already up and ready for them to go? Scalability, is the tool going to work the same on 100 endpoints versus 10,000 endpoints? It will make a difference. If you can't scale it to the level that your organization is, then it's not going to be obviously not going to be a good solution for you there. And then threat hunting and non-persistence. This was something that I had never really dealt with, the non-persistent aspect of it before. And do you lose data if that endpoint's not online? Say you have an endpoint, and you're trying to track data for it. That image has now been spun down because the person logged out. How much of that data is still available to you? Did you lose that data now because the endpoint's offline? Do you still have that data? Some of that becomes important if you're trying to track where something spread and you can't see all the data. You may only see a portion or a subset of it. Excuse me. And then VDI is just going to be treated differently in general because of some of the persistence aspects. Communication is obviously going to be one of the biggest parts of that piloting phase. Everyone that's involved with it needs to know. If you're pushing it out to end user workstations, they need to know that something new is being pushed to their machine. Who do they report an issue to if there is an issue? Because there probably are going to be some issues when you're doing this pilot testing, and the purpose is to work all those bugs out before you deploy it to your whole organization and have 50,000 people screaming at you instead of just 50 people letting you know there's an issue. And then you need a quick rollback plan. So for us, VDI was the ideal one to test with, because if they have an issue, they reboot and they've now got a different image and their issue is corrected because they can go back to what we were running, before, not the new solution. They need to make sure they know all start end dates. Help desk needs to know. Your SOC needs to be aware. If you're piloting something over a long period of time, they need to know when it's going to start and end so they know when to expect to see things return to normal. I say that no one will ever say you communicated too much, but you do have to be careful with how much information you give them. If you write a 4-page email, no one's going to read it. So you want to make sure the communication is very precise, direct, and gives the content they need and not a whole lot more. And then the part that seems extremely easy, but isn't, is actually making a decision. You're going to have a lot of good data from a bunch of different products at this point, and you may have one that kind of stands out and may be really good to you, but it may be extremely expensive versus another solution that offers similar functionality. And these are some of the things you're going to have to take into account. You're going to need to get like the key decision makers in your organization working with you, procurement, purchasing, all that kind of stuff involved too. But you want to make sure you're advocating the best product for your organization, not necessarily which one had the best detection on X, Y, and Z, or which one has the coolest, account rep that you work with. You have to sell the product that will provide the best results to your organization. So these were just two tools that I referenced in there, the Flare VM tools that were developed by FireEye and the APT simulator by Nextron Systems. I did want to give a special thanks to the IU Health team that I work with every day. The phase 2 would not have been possible because I would have never had time to do all this by myself. So these are just some of the individuals that I work with every day. Some of them are in the room. So, thank you all for that. And that's pretty much it. If anyone has any questions, I'll take some now. If you are not comfortable asking questions, in public, Twitter, email, phone, any of that, and you can read through that too if any of those apply to you. Make your decision based on that. Yes.
Can you share the final 3?
So we're considered a nonprofit organization, so I can't advocate for vendors. They look at that as like me kind of advocating for a specific vendor. Trying to how to say this without.
What is their name?
So one of them kind of sounds like a popular offensive security tool. One of them was a recent Avengers movie. That's about it. So, any other questions from anyone? Yes.
In the process of your testing, did you find that what you were going to call the carbon blasting world, the new next-gen AV vendors perform? I mean, was there any significant difference between those traditional vendors?
So we currently, when we were doing the testing, had a kind of legacy AV, traditional AV solution deployed. And it was not anywhere near as well as some of these, next-gen AV vendors. There was a big difference. When on that weighted scale, there was generally 30 to 40% difference in results. Most of that APT simulation style testing was not caught at all by a traditional AV vendor, which that's not what their bread and butter is, right? Theirs is to catch malware, viruses, botnets, some of that stuff. But it did well on those. But when you started getting into the more of the attacking type stuff, like your red team offensive type stuff you would see, or like APT style attacks, they just fell on their face on that.
So on the top 3 were next gen?
Yeah, they were all next gen, or more of the EDR threat hunting capabilities built into them.
At what point did money come into the conversation or the testing? Was it during the first phases when you were trying to knock down the 21, or was it at the end?
So we didn't really get into money aspects of it until we kind of narrowed it down to that like top 5, top 3 or so. I'm not the money person. I'm going to push that off to someone else. I'm the guy that's just there to break the stuff. So my job was, here's the ones that I think I can break the least of. And here's the ones that are going to make my job more difficult now moving forward. But yeah, about the start of the second phase is when we got, budgetary style quotes from all these different places. And then as you get further along in that phase 2 testing, you really start getting more into figuring out, okay, I think this is going to be like the clear-cut winner, or these two are like really close together. And then that's when you really start doing more of the budgetary and pricing components of it.
I was actually, might I add something in there as well. I'm the money person. Why you're doing this, and because when you go in there and do your budget for our organization, you sit in a room with all the other executives and basically say, this is what my initiative costs, and this is why it's important. And usually about 2/3 of what you go into the room with, you don't get. Because we're looking at other companies. But ultimately, when you can prove the risk and prove that putting this into mitigate something, then you have a very good chance of getting selected. But again, especially in that roadshow to your senior leadership.
The main reason that I asked that was I was thinking of if you came down to this is by far the best technical solution that would be on your budget. That seems like a lot of time invested for something that you could.
Yeah.
I realize IU probably has the funds to buy what they need.
Yeah, in some instances you're not going to. Yeah, if you're a smaller company, you may run into the instance where you're like, this is the best solution, but there's just not the money there to do it. And then that's when you can maybe look at some of the other tools that you may use, that there's some overlapping functionality, and can you start combining some of those into one tool? So, and I hate this one. So you can get that single pane of glass view. God, I hated that I just did that. But but sometimes that can help sway some of those financial decisions. Anybody else? No? Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for coming. I appreciate it. I hope I didn't put you to sleep.